Good evening. This is Sister Trudy, and I'm here tonight with Judges 16, 17, and 18 with It's About Time. And what we're covering here is a continuation of the story of Samuel. And we know that Samuel has just gone through some traumatic things that have happened to him, but we are going to carry on to where he is, where we now talk about the furtherance of Samson's disobedience and then his final death is what we will talk about. So it starts off, it says, Now Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot there and went into her. When the Gazites were told, Samson has come here, they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. They were quiet all night, saying, In the morning, when it is daylight, we will kill him. And Samson lay low till midnight. Then he arose at midnight, took hold of the doors of the gates of the city and the two gateposts, pulled them up, bar and all, put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill, the face of Hebron. Now, what an insult. When they thought that they were going to get Samson, Samson pulled a complete trick. They were waiting for the light, but Samson was moving in darkness. And what did he do? He took something that symbolized safety and protection for them because it was the gate and the gatepost. So he took all of this and actually moved it somewhere else. Can you imagine coming in and somebody removes your front door? Your front door is there to protect you from the outer elements, from intrusions and things like this. He just removed that safety from them. Can you imagine? And also, we find here that Samson, our brother, has not grown at all because the lust of the flesh drove him to all these different places that he still wanted what his flesh wanted, because he went and he saw a harlot. And we know that the harlot, her name is actually Delilah. We already know who she is. We've all heard the story of Samson and Delilah. But there are interesting things that we miss out of these particular stories about Samson and Delilah, because there's so much that's in here. Now we start to see, too, the type of character that not only Samson has, but as well as Delilah actually has. Then it goes on where there is the Philistines. They actually come to Delilah and they persuade her to actually conjure up this master plan so that they can capture Samson. Because Samson, when we see most of the descriptions, because we talk about his strength, we always think that he's this muscle-bound guy and all these things like that. But I don't think so. I just think that it was what he was born with, the covenant God had made over his life, that he had supernatural strength. So if you have supernatural strength, you could be as skinny as a pole. But if you have God carrying you, there's unlimited potential that you have because of what God has upon you. So then it talks about afterward it happened that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistine came up to her and said to her, Entice him and find out where his great strength lies, and by means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and every one of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. Now, isn't this amazing? It seems like the silver is the catalyst for all things. We had our brother Judas that portrayed Jesus because of a bag of silver. But the interesting thing about here is that it says now he called himself in love with this woman. So there was a certain affection that he carried for her and with her. And they knew this. And the Philistines had a master plan. And the thing about it is that instead of loving him, she loved the money. Because when we start to look at it, 1,100 shekels of silver is equivocal to 140 pounds of silver. So it kind of goes back to that thing that, Where was she in all of this? That she was just as guilty as everyone else, as well as Samson being guilty because of his disobedience, being obedient to his flesh and not to God's will. And so we see the demise that starts to happen here at this point. But just to see the type of woman that Delilah was, that she had no compassion for this man that loved her, and yet she's going to trade it for silver. So it's like the might as well said the beginning of gold digging, where it actually comes from, because here she was going to profit from her betrayal of this person that basically loved her. She didn't love him, but it's a betrayal. So then it goes on to talk about the sources where she says, Samson, please tell me where your strength lies and with what you may be bound to afflict you. So, and Samson says to her, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings, yet not dried, I will be weak like any other man. So the lords and the Philistines, they came with these 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried. And then they actually came into the room, and Delilah screams, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And instantaneously that he jumps up and he breaks all these things. And so Samson was known for being a ruthless warrior. That when, we saw back in 15 that when they were saying that he was cutting from the hip thigh, that means that there was nothing less. He was vicious with it. Samson has some skills with taking you out. So here was the same thing. He broke this just like it had been yarn. With fire comes a party. If you light something, it just instantly disintegrates. There's no bond there anymore. Then it continues on, and she's going based upon the affectionate ways that she talks to him, and she's playing these games. Oh, you don't love me. Look how you've mocked me. Look how you've told me all these lies and stuff about what it would take to actually take away your strength. What could it be done if you love me? You know how women are. You know how we get when you really want something. If you love me, these are the things that you would share with me. So she was using her womanly influences on him, and yet he was sucked in because he was weak for her. He was weak for her. So we go in again, and then this time she's asking, how can we bind you? What is the source of your strength? He tells her about new rope. They get new rope. Same old scenario. Try the same thing. Guess what? He breaks it like it's thread. Then it goes on and it continues that they do it the 3rd time. And then so she says, well, until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me what you may be bound with. And he said to her, if you weave 7 locks of my hair into a web of the loom, so it wove it tightly with a batten and a loom, and said to her, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. What did Samson do? Samson got up and ripped it apart as usual. And then so she goes, I love you when your heart is not with me. You have mocked me these 3 times, and I have not told you where you have not told me where your great strength lies. So now Delilah has the nerve to try to get upset because she wants him to be faithful and true to her, but she's not doing the same in return. So then finally it comes down. It came to pass when she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him so that his soul was vexed to death. She was worrying him, and that he told her all his heart and said to her, no razor has ever come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite of God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, my strength will leave me. Now, we talk about this, that sometimes that when we get in what we call love with things, that we allow them to lull us in, and that we give them the information to actually take from us and make us weak. And this is what happened here with Samson, because Samson was so lulled by Delilah, because as the story goes, she puts his head in her lap and she's stroking his head. And in the interim of all of that, he has become so lulled or put to sleep by her. he didn't even feel that his head was being shaven. Now, she brought a barber in to actually shave him, and he had no idea. So I'm like, this is some kind of super strength that she had over him. Then she goes that Samson, the Philistines are upon us. And they actually came and they had their money this time. They're paying her for her job. Then she began to do the normal stuff that she does. And what happens is that she began to torment him and his strength left him. So when you get outside of God's will, you can only play so much and play so far. And when you compromise that which God has given you, that you will lose your protection. This is what happened to Samson. He lost his protection because he was covered under the covenant as a Nazirite. But because he allowed that the source of his strength to get away from him, that he lost his covering. So this is what happened with Samson, our brother. And then as that happens, it was the further humiliation that came along with it, that they actually took him and they actually enslaved him at this point. And, it was like a trophy that they could go around and say, look, we got the great Samson. So now what was once their source of fear has now became their source of ridicule and mockery, because now they have captured the great Samson. And then it goes and says, so he woke up from his sleep and said, I will go out before you at other times and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord has left him. How many times have we gotten into things and we just depended on God to be with us and all of our stuff, and then we realize that he's no longer with us? What a revelation. So now the Philistines, the first thing that they did, they took his eyes. They actually brought him down to Gaza. They bound him with bronze fetters, and he became a grinder in the prison. Now this great judge that had been a major force to deal with, that Samson was a whole entire army by himself, they have now reduced him down to a lowly job and position, and they've taken his eyes from him, so he cannot see. So, but the thing about it that they did not realize is that once they cut off his hair, that it would grow back. And that is just like what God does for us, that when we seek him and when we go down to our lowest, that we can come into the relationship with him to need him. When you need God more than you need anything in your life and you become desperate for him, this is when you push and press to get into him so that you know more about him. So the anointing that was put on Samson never left. It was his disobedience that caused the problem. So we can see that by the hair growing again. So why they had him in prison and going through all this, hair was growing on his head, hair was growing on his face. So he then still had the strength and the power that God had given him in his mother's womb. But this is where the people got comfortable with it, and they did not understand what was going forth. So as they imprisoned him and he went on, they brought him out and they wanted to mock him and show him in front of everybody, oh, we defeated the great Samson. And they had a little child that actually held his hand and brought him out. And he asked the little child, and this is where we start to talk about the strength that Samson might not have been this big, bulky guy that we thought he was, but this child that actually came out with him and led him to where he wanted to go. And he stood between the two pillars, and he asked the child, place my hands, show me where these are. And the child did, and he placed his hands between the two pillars. And when he did, he says, let me feel the pillars which support the temple so that I may lean on them. Now the temple was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there, about 3,000 men and women on the roof, watching while Samson performed. Then Samson called the Lord, saying, O Lord God, remember me, I pray. Strengthen me, I pray, just this once. Do you have a just this once in you? Even though things are bad, things you might not understand, but do you have the ability to go back to God and say, God, just this one more time, that you would favor me just this one more time? And Samson took hold of the two middle pillars which supported the temple, and he braced himself against them, one at his right and one at his left. Then Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. So the dead that he killed at his death were more than he killed in his entire life. By his actions, he was able to kill over 3,000 people at one swoop, one push that God gave him and restored him into the strength that he had before. So that was the story of Samson and Delilah and how he came to an end. Now we go over to 17, which is about Micah. And Micah actually comes in and he makes a shrine for idols. And then so it goes, Micah has actually stolen money from his mom. You know, cardinal sin, don't do that kind of stuff. But what he's done right now is kind of redeeming himself. It says, now there was a man from the mountains of Ephraim whose name was Micah. And he said to his mother, the 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from you and on which you put a curse, even saying it in my ears, here's the silver with me. I took it. And his mother said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my son. Now, here again, we talk about these shekels, 140 pounds of silver that they're toting around with them as they're stealing things, because that is what the conversion is. So, but once it was cursed because it was something that you don't do by stealing from your mother, but then when he returned it to be back in good favor because he did not want that curse upon him, that she turned around and blessed him. And then he goes on to Micah's mother at this point, directs him to take some of the money that was to be used to make idols with. So this is why I keep emphasizing that it's 140 pounds, because you probably were thinking how with silver they made these huge idols, because it was the massive amount of silver that they actually had. 140 shekels was actually 1,100 shekels were 140 pounds. So there was adequate amounts to actually do this. So it says, when he had returned the 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother said, I had wholly dedicated the silver from my hand to the Lord for my son to make a carved image and molded image. Now, therefore, I will return it to you. Thus he returned the silver to his mother. Then his mother took 200 shekels of silver and gave to the silversmith, and he made it into a carved image and a molded image, and they were in the house of Micah. So you see here, we have the same scenario starting to happen again as we did with the children of Israel, that they had the God of everlasting, but yet still they chose to do new things, that they once again repeated old history, going back to get these idol gods once again to serve. So Micah basically set up the first shrine, a sort of a small temple where they would place these idols to go and worship. So they were creating instead of going to the temple, they were creating their own spaces. And this is one of the things that, if we remember back where we were talking about the elders warning them against the mixing of with the Canaanite women and all these different things, because you start to take on these different customs and traditions. And so he goes on, and then Micah even made an ephod. Now that's the dressing that the priests actually wear. So, and he consecrated one of his sons who became a priest. So we see that they're putting their own order going on. Instead of following God's order, they're making their own order. Then it goes on, in those days there were no king in Israel. Everyone did what they thought was right in their own eyes. So when you don't have leadership, you have chaos. And this is exactly what this is explaining. that every time that there is not someone that will hold the rule, that everybody feels that what they're doing is right, is this good over here in my side, it's good over in my house, you do you, I'll do me. And it causes mass confusion. There is no uniformity or cohesiveness in the people. So they gave an example. They said, it seemed right to the eyes of Adam and Eve to eat the forbidden fruit, but God said it was wrong. It seemed right for the eyes of the sons of Jacob to sell Joseph into slavery, but it was wrong. It was right in the eyes of Nadab and Abihu to give God strange fire, but God said it was wrong. So see, this is what happens when we lean to our own understanding, that we don't have governing bodies or leaders to actually give us the right interpretation of things and keep us accountable for ourselves. So these people were just basically all wilding out doing what they wanted to do. Then Michael hires an unscrupulous Levite. So we have this opportunistic Levite that wants more for himself, and instead of being in the order that God left, he goes out and he seeks, and he actually basically sells his service to Micah. And so because of it, Micah promises him quite a few things. It says, now there was a young man from Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah. He was a Levite and he was staying there. The man departed from the city of Bethlehem in Judah to stay wherever he could find a place. So he's running around like a nomad. Then he came to the mountains of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, as he journeyed. Then it goes and says, and Micah said to him, where do you come from? So he said to him, I am a Levite. So even though you're a renegade, you still want to cover yourself and say who you are. You're representing yourself. But if you've left where you are, how can you call yourself that which you left? But here's where he's talking about it. And he says, I'm on my way to find a place to stay. Micah said to him, dwell with me and be a father and a priest to me, and I will give you 10 shekels of silver per year, a suit of clothes, your sustenance. So the Levite went in. Then the Levite was content to dwell with the man, and the young man became like one of his sons to him. Now you see how his own ambitions actually create something that goes against God's will. The Levites were set to serve in the temples. They could go around any other place, but why would you land into a place where someone was serving idols? The Levite could have went, because they spread them out all through the territories that when they came over into the promised land, where they could actually work in those capacities. But the temple is mainly what was set up for their service. So Micah consecrated the Levite. Now here's Micah consecrating somebody. And the young man became the priest and lived in the house of Micah. Then Micah said, now I know the Lord will be good to me, since I have a Levite as a priest. Don't ever think that God is going to actually reward you for pretending to be in his will. He is wise enough to know that that is not it, that you're masquerading because you have someone that's supposed to be called. The Levite in itself was supposed to be able to actually leave where he was, or correct Micah that we're not supposed to have these false idols, but yet he blended in his role. How much do we compromise in our daily lives in what we're doing? Even though you're called, but do you make compromises for money, for status? What do? So we're going on to 18. It says, Dan spies on Laish. The tribe of Dan sends spies to look for the land and to take among the people of Israel. In those days, there were no kings in Israel. In those days, the tribes of the Danites were seeking an inheritance for itself to dwell in, for until that day, their inheritance among the tribes of Israel had not fallen to them. So the children of Dan sent 5 men of their family from the territory, men of valor from Zorah and Estaol, to spy out on the land and search it. Then said to them, go search the land. So they went to the mountains of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and lodged there. So we have now that the Danites that when they did not conquer their land. You have to remember that when Joshua died, he told them that there was still work to do, to not get comfortable. So this is a result of what they're talking about right here. So they had the nerve to go into somebody else's land to actually spy on them instead of fixing what's already in their own backyard and conquering the people that were there. They chose to just to coexist, but now they want to go and take over someone else's existence. And then it goes on that the Danites actually meet Micah's Levite. And then it goes, it says, while they were at the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the young Levite. They turned aside and said to him, who brought you here? See, being in places you're not supposed to, you get found out. What are you doing in this place? What do you have here? He said to them, thus and so Micah did for me. He has hired me, and I become his priest. So they said to him, please inquire of God, that you may know whether the journey on which you go will be prosperous. Now here they are trying to remind him of what he has been called for, to make sure that he's not running over here wasting the gifting that God has actually given him. And the priest said to them, go in peace. The presence of the Lord will be with you and your way. So we have to watch out for compromises. When we see things that go against God's will, God's way, and God's word, this is where we have to be careful and stand steadfast. Even though the Danites were doing what was wrong, they still recognized what God had called and preordained before, and the role and the responsibility that they were supposed to be partaking in. So the 5 men departed from, so they chose a city, and it was the city of expansion was called Laish. So the 5 men departed and went to Laish. They saw the people who were there, how they dwelt safely in the manner of the Sidonians, quiet and secure. Now here it is, they go and they spy on somebody that has their life together. They're living a great life. It's quiet. They don't have a lot of chaos going on. But here they are. They want to come and interrupt this life. And then so they asked for a report basically on what was happening. It says, what is your report? So they said, arise, let us go up against them, for we have seen the land, and indeed it is very good. Now, here they are being bullies, basically, to come in and want to steal the land that was already in existence peacefully, when they could have gone in their own backyard and cleaned up their own mess and got the land that God had already predestined for them. But he said that you had to do something. God will not continue to let us get without us having to have action. And this is what happened here with the Danites, that they wanted everything, but they wanted no action. They had just as much land, what that was allotted to them for their inheritance, but they did not have the courage to go and fight. But they take someone that basically is living a very quiet and solitary life. They don't have a lot of other influences, and they want to come in and they want to take over. So it says, and 600 men of the family of the Danites went from there for Zorah and Eshtaol, armed with weapons of war. They went up and encamped in Kirjath Jearim in Judah. Therefore they call that place Manahi Dan to this very day. There is west of the Kirjath Jearim, and they passed from there to the mountain of Ephraim to come to the house of Micah.